Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today we're talking epic walks, and one of the most beautiful and most famous is the Pacific Crest Trail. It starts in the border with Mexico and the US, goes all the way through along the Pacific Crest and ends in Canada. And here to talk about this trail is former politician and current CEO of Glenbow Ranch Park Foundation, Jeromy Farkas. Hey Jeromy, welcome to the podcast.
Hey buddy, thanks so much for having me.
I'm super interested to chat with you because I've noticed, you're a public figure here in Calgary, and it seems to me you've changed as a result of this, but maybe that's just my perception. So before we go into that question, my first question is, you walked the PCT, you'd had I can only imagine running for mayor, the challenge, the stress that may be, but why did you choose to do a thru hike, and why the PCT?
Well, I'd always thought about doing something like this, and it was one of my grandmother's dreams, actually. But she unfortunately passed away during the campaign, during COVID, and she never got to a point in her life where she was able to walk something like the Appalachian Trail. And I figured because she had passed away, because we didn't really have an incredible way to be able to honor her in the moment, I wanted to do something by design. I wanted to do something intentional where I could follow this calling. And then it was just a number of different things kind of lined up for me, both personally and professionally. Like hardly anybody's going to have the just career window or runway to leave for 6 or 7 months. But whether I liked it or not, the election loss gave me that opening. And then finally, we were able to do it as a fundraiser for Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Calgary and area. So I had a lot of people after the election reach out to me and say, hey, the next time you run for something, I want to be the first one to write you a check. And in politics, people will tell you that a lot of that is so-called moral support, but in this case, it was actual financial support. So I had a couple checks that were stacking up on my desk, and I figured, I could run for something, but it didn't have to be politics. So a number of things lined up, and my grandmother, Granny Liz, she would always tell me, don't just be good for something. So I was able to do a lot of different things simultaneously with the trip, which really contributed, I think, toward the end of it, in me being able to finish it and endure some of the mental challenges.
And you raised a ton of money. It was well into the six figures. Was it 400 grand? Am I misremembering that? It was a big number. I remember when I saw it.
Yeah, I remember when I was chatting with Ken Lee McQuillo, the brand new at the time CEO of Big Brothers and Big Sisters. We had this incredible, amazing goal. We thought if we were lucky, if we played our cards right for 6 months, if we really banged and drummed up the support, then we'd be able to raise 50 grand. And it was to my astonishment that I think it was March 7th or something that we had our press conference and we announced that this was happening. And then it gave me 5 days to kind of get ready. But by the end of those days, and before I'd even set a single foot on the trail, we had hit that $50,000 goal. So we doubled that, and then we doubled it again. But it was an incredible opportunity for a number of reasons, because I got to live out just a lifelong type of dream of mine, but then I also really got a sense of who my friends were after the election. There's a lot of folks who stepped up to support me, had no interest in associating with me, period, in terms of politics, but it was quite astonishing to me to see the level of support, and the fact that it wasn't necessarily my friends in politics who are supporting me.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's I can kind of see that. I want to dig into the politics because you mentioned, things just came together after your political run. But there's tens of thousands of politicians that have hard political runs. You're the only one that's done the PCT. Is there something, you have this, personal connection of wanting to do it, but is there something after this bruising political run where you just needed some time off? A lot of people go back to a job that, a week later. Is there something, it almost feels like you were searching for something or having some time to process. Was that part of this decision to undertake this long walk?
Well, I think absolutely. And something you don't realize is like when you're an elected official, and in my case, I was a Calgary City Councillor, when I ran and I lost that race for mayor, it's basically loser leaves town. Immediately following my loss in the election, I had lost my job essentially and was unemployed. And it was a very interesting and stressful and frustrating time. But one of the first calls that I got after that was say, an offer to basically do the typical track that a lot of these politicians do. It's usually in government relations or lobbying. But the first opportunity I had was actually to become a lobbyist for a tobacco industry firm to try to, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but the opportunity was essentially try to make it easier to brand e-cigarettes and such to kids. So like, I didn't take the gig, but then I figured, well, if I have this name recognition, if I have these connections, if I have the communication ability and the ability to raise money, why don't I actually use that for something that's good rather than just trying to take the typical track or path that most people out of politics will do. So in my case, it was relatively... It was a pretty high risk endeavor to kind of go all in on this, especially so soon after the election. But an incredible amount of people stepped up to support me. And when I was in the right mindset to seek and receive that mentorship, the mentors that I needed in my life arrived. But I won't understate just the value that there was going from such a high stakes, incredibly stressful environment here in Calgary where practically everybody knew me. Half the public was happy that I lost and and were gloating about it. And maybe the other half were sad that I lost, but also pitied me. And I didn't really like either of them. So it was very freeing to be able to go to a brand new place where essentially nobody knew me and I could sort of start fresh. A lot of folks don't realize that your anonymity is actually quite valuable and priceless because, especially during COVID, like all of us who were involved at the city and the provincial level, it was very intense. And not to say that it wasn't intense for everybody, but in my case, you'd have people trying to camp out in my backyard. I'd have people banging on my door, threatening to murder my family, things like that. So it was just a very, very high tension moment, and it was so incredibly valuable for me in a number of different ways to be able to leave that at least momentarily and to do something wild and crazy like trying to walk across the continent.
And so you decide to do this incredible walk. What's your background with the outdoors? We've talked to some people who literally they start training a couple of days before, they've never camped outside, then they go do some incredible aspect. I think I've read that you're a runner, so you obviously must do some stuff outside. But like, was this second nature to you to carry everything on your back and go sleep outside for night after night?
Well, this probably surprises a lot of folks who have only followed me through politics, but I think there's a lot more to me than just politics. Prior to my trip, I was a certified wilderness first responder. Had probably spent at least 100 nights in various backcountry settings through our beautiful trails and backcountry experiences here in Banff and Lake Louise and Jasper and Kananaskis. So I had quite a bit of grounding in terms of the technical skills there. But, a challenge like the Pacific Crest Trail, I think regardless of how prepared you are going into it, it's an absolutely insane endeavor to think that for 100 plus days, in my case, I think it was 172 days, just starting in Mexico, pointing myself north, walking as far as I could. There's nothing that prepares you for both the good and the bad on the trail. And I think there's a quote that life laughs while you try to make plans. But for me, it was a good lesson personally that life doesn't always go to plan, but that doesn't mean that it goes worse. I think almost always it goes better.
I love that message because it is, I talk to people of like a 20-year plan and I just think life's so chaotic. How can you have a goal? Like it's nice to have that, but like opportunities happen, life changes. The early days, so you're down in the border of the US and Mexico and you're starting this. Like, what are you feeling as you set out on this? Is it relief? Is it apprehension? Is it, are you looking forward to time to reflect? Is it something totally different?
It's a little bit different for everybody. I think it's a couple thousand people start every year in Mexico and try to make it back to Canada. I got the incredible opportunity to meet so many great people, and through the course of getting to meet them, their challenges, their opportunities, their struggles, their successes, their setbacks in life, it really gave me a lot more context in terms of what I was going through. But It was interesting because I think, unlike many of the people I met, my journey was playing out in public, and there's a lot of folks who thought that what I was doing was a giant ripoff or a hoax to begin with. So every day I'd be posting my GPS coordinates. I'd be posting to Strava so that people could follow me and see how the journey was going. So it was a much more public journey than I think I would have liked in hindsight. It would have been nice just to kind of do this on my own, but for better or for worse, very much for better, I'd invited the public to come and follow. So I was posting journals every single day, posting through social media, Facebook, videos, stuff like that to try to bring people along. And I would say in the early days, I was real nervous, but there's almost like a moment where you decided, well, you've burnt the boats. You're here in the desert in Mexico. You got all the stuff on your back and there's nothing left to do besides just start walking. And I think in the early days, especially, I felt such huge momentum and buzz because our fundraising goals were just being smashed at home, which really helped, I think, for me, solve and maybe smooth out some of the rougher days, because not every day is an amazing vacation. You have a lot of days, there's setbacks, you're in pain too, starting to walk between 40 and 60 kilometers per day. Your toenails are peeling off, your lips are cracked and all the rest. But I think through it all, though, I felt a lot of energy and buzz because so many people were getting involved in the work that Big Brothers and Big Sisters do. And they were sending me these messages. And of course, I had a lot of haters as well. But I'm the kind of personality where, I get an email or a text message telling me why I can't do something. My immediate response is to prove them wrong.
I love that. I want to talk a little bit about the challenges of the trail. And, some people think this is a straightforward walk, but there can be some really challenging early season conditions in the Sierra. Did you deal with those? Can you maybe describe some of the challenges you had to deal with?
Yeah, so I started in March, which is early by the standards of the thru-hike. And I think it was on my second day actually going into Mount Laguna that I had snow. So from day one, sleet, extreme heat, extreme cold. I had to pack to be ready for, say, plus 35 degrees Celsius, shifts down to minus 10, minus 15. So just being prepared for all of that, I think, was really, really instrumental. And plus, you learn a lot as you go and you make a lot of stupid mistakes. And you keep making mistakes, but you hope that they're different kinds of mistakes and they're not as bad as... rather, you're hoping that you're improving as you go along from those setbacks. And you're also learning from other people. There's an incredible trail community called Trail Angels along the way, along every single one of the 2,600 miles. So you also really have to challenge yourself physically, but I think more so it's mentally. Putting yourself out there, being willing and able to be vulnerable, to lean on other people for help. I think that was the biggest challenge for me, was living sort of and personally and professionally, kind of like a lone wolf mindset of strong, rugged individualism and persistence. I can do this on my own. Well, that type of attitude, it doesn't pan out very well on the trail. You're immediately thrown into a situation where you have to be somebody that other people can rely on, and you also have to be somebody who's willing to rely on others. So that mental dimension it really threw me off to start, but as I got more and more comfortable with asking for help, being willing to stick my thumb out as a hitchhiker like anyone else would do, or to ask other people for their advice and their tips, my experience got so much better as I came to terms with the fact that, I guess the best way to sum it up, on the trail, they have the saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go with friends.
I'm interested in learning a little bit more about your experience with the relationships of other people on the trail. You talk about being a lone wolf. Did you find that, you made friends that you're still in contact with? Were you, did you join a group and kind of have a group of kind of like trail friends?
I still think absolutely every single day about people I've met. I probably met over the course of the journey many thousands of people. There's a good couple dozen that come to mind. I'll be just walking or looking at something and just remembering a joke or a shared experience, or I may look at a photo, or Facebook might show me a memory, and it'll bring up just experiences. And it's a very bittersweet feeling, but it's interesting. Everyone who goes on the trail has such an incredible story, a reason, a passion that's sort of driven them to be there. And it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? There's challenges, there's setbacks, there's reasons that people have decided to throw themselves at such an incredible challenge like that. But yeah, by far it was the people who made the experience what it was for me. And I think back to some pretty views and incredible experiences in the mountains and the forest and the desert, but all the highlights, the top 10 out of 10 moments that I could recite for you, they were all shared with other people.
What's an average day like on the PCT? I think a lot of people have gone backpacking. How is it different on the PCT versus someone who's just, done a trip in one of the national parks in the US or Canada?
So I was really fortunate in that my election loss was in the end of October, which gave me November, December, January to really throw myself at the training. So there's a nearby mountain called Prairie Mountain here in K Country. I just threw myself at it, sometimes several times a day, getting in the vertical elevation. And when I started on the Pacific Crest Trail, it meant that I was probably much more fit than the other people who were just starting, say, a summer vacation or were recently retired. So all this to say is that the more prepared you are, the better investment you have in your gear and your physical abilities, the easier it'll be. So my daily experience was relatively straightforward, given that I could average between 60 and 90 kilometers per day. It meant that I was only maybe a couple days at most between resupply points. So I'd wake up, have my morning coffee, watch the sunrise, do a little bit of journaling, plan out where I was going to go for the day. I'd have to determine in advance how much water I'd need, where I'd be stopping for lunch, where I'd be hoping to camp. And then, again, nothing really, like life on the trail never 100% goes to plan, but through hikers, for us to succeed, you have to have some element of planning. So I would walk as far as I could for the day. Sometimes it would get so unbearably hot that, say, around 1 to 3 p.m., I'd have to siesta and just try to hide under a yucca tree or a cactus or something. And then I'd just keep going until it started to get dark, and then pitch my tent wherever it was. But I was fortunate in that the sections that I was on the trail were relatively short, which meant that at a given time, I only really needed to carry, say, 2 or 3 days of food at most. But for individuals, say, who were starting at, say, 20 or 30 kilometers per day, that meant that they'd be going, say, 7 or 8 days between resupplies, which made it a lot more challenging logistically for them because their pack would be a lot heavier. So it's almost like it's kind of a rich get richer situation. The faster you can be means the faster that you can be. So if my pack was under 15 pounds, that meant I could really, really haul ass and cover a stretch of territory that somebody carrying, say, 50-pound pack couldn't. So this is all to say that the daily life, there's no one standard. But for me, I tried to go as quickly as I could. I tried to really challenge myself. And I'd gone into it with that type of mentality. And looking back and recalling some of my first days, I just really wish that I had taken it slower. There's moments that I wish I had just stayed to savor them. And it was really up until about, I'd say, halfway through the trail that I decided that, or I realized that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity. Why am I robbing myself of it by trying to do it as fast as possible? So there's a point at around halfway through the Sierra that I decided that I was just going to milk it for all it was. I probably could have done it faster than 170 days, but looking back, it feels like it's just an experience that I'm never going to have the chance to replicate. So toward the end, I really tried to savor every moment, especially for the people that I was beginning to meet and form much stronger friendships with.
A lot of people, when they go on one of these long thru hikes, they notice a dramatic change in their physical and mental health. Now, you went in there in incredible shape, but did you notice a change in just kind of like your mental health and kind of like, the day-to-day stress we all have, or just how we feel? How did this walk change you mentally, or did it?
I've tried to answer this question for myself, but it's hard for me to say what what is attributable to going from campaign and political and public life to private life versus going from private life to time on the trail. Because when I was on the campaign and when I was a Calgary City Councillor, I was working between 90 and 100 hours a week. Through the course of a week, we may receive, say, 1,000 to 2,000 phone calls, emails. I might have to go to campaign events from about 7 a.m. all the way to 11 p.m. every single day, rinse and repeat. So when you think about when you start in terms of busyness from about 11 out of 10, going from that to just sort of regular life and the hustle and bustle, that was a huge jarring experience for me. But going from just regular life to the trail is a whole other extreme too, because time moves so much differently. It moves slower. You're much more present and in the moment. And if I could attribute the improvement in my own mental health to anything, I would say it's just having to quit cold turkey on the social media, not being inundated with the text messages, the notifications, and all the rest. And it wasn't something I intended to do because I was still addicted to sort of politics and the news, and I wanted to know what this new mayor and the city councilor were doing. But it was the best possible thing for me because I was in settings where there wasn't cell reception for 5 days ahead of me and 5 days behind. So I couldn't have been in the loop even if I wanted to, which was just an incredible benefit. And I've tried to the extent possible, carry forward some of these habits and some of these learnings into my daily routine since I've returned, so that I can kind of try to keep some of those more healthier practices.
So I'm really interested in digging into that a little bit more. So kind of before you did this walk, I knew you through, you'd see videos that would pop up of sound bites of you on Reddit or YouTube. And then on Reddit now, you comment kind of on the Calgary thread. And to me, these seem like two completely different people. And I'm just wondering, are you that different from kind of who you were before? Is it just the medium that when writing, people are typically more thoughtful? Like, is this the trail? Is this you leaving politics? Like, what accounts for me as someone who's like, I'm not super political, but just kind of seeing like these, you seem very different after this walk and just your comments. What happened, do you think? Or is it just the medium?
Because the vast majority of people know me only through politics, they assume that everything that I do has a political dimension to it. And it's challenging because if I were trying to answer this question, have I changed or haven't I changed? It's sort of like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. It's kind of a useless exercise. All I can do is say for the listeners right now, think of yourself 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Have you changed? Well, it's sort of obvious, the question. But all that to say is that, I was elected as one of the youngest city councilors ever. And when you're in your 20s, being thrown into a role like that with a ton of responsibility, a ton of scrutiny, a lot of attention, of course you're going to f things up. And in my case, there's so many things that I look back on just in terms of my own lack of life experience. Like a good example is we had one of the first things our council debated was, say, this parental leave policy. And I voted against it because I thought, it's the job of the city councilor to be there representing their constituents. And how dare them if they want to start a family or to take all the time off because democracy doesn't sleep. This is such an important job and all the rest. But I was the only one voting against it because in hindsight, it's just so goddamn ridiculous because with some life experience, I now realize, every single line of work should be able to accommodate this. And it doesn't make you a worse city councilor if you have a family. I think it makes you a better one. And we're in a position now in terms of politics where we want a broad diversity of opinion. We want a diversity of viewpoints. And why wouldn't we want something like a parental leave policy, right? So just in terms of just life experience, I think a lot of how I've looked at some of these challenges and problems and opportunities, I think it's changed just as a result of growing older. And some people sort of assume that I was, say, in my 50s when I started. I don't feel like I look like that, but some people assume but I was literally still paying off my student loans when I was first elected, right? So that's the first part. But the second part, I think, is more in terms of the politics. Like losing the election really gave me the chance to be able to learn who my friends were. There was a lot of folks who surrounded me when I was in office based on what they thought I could do for them in a much more transactional way. And I didn't realize that. And I think regardless of whether I noticed, I started to buy into my own hype about myself. And I think there's a level of ego and arrogance to that. And losing the election was the best possible thing that could have happened to me because, again, I got to learn who my friends were. And it was very interesting because I come from a more, I think, conservative side of the spectrum. And I'd sort of bought into this idea that, if you're a friend, you're a conservative. And if you're a conservative, you're right. And if you're on the left of the spectrum, that means you're my adversary. You're not my friend, that sort of thing. And it was very challenging to my worldview when I'll be blunt with you, man. Like when I lost, it was mostly conservatives who dumped me. And it was often liberals who reached out and say, hey, I didn't like your politics, but I like what you're doing here on the trail. I'm going to support you. I'm going to help you. And it was a bit of a mind because there's these folks that I'd never really tried to reach out to and in terms of my own personal behavior engage with. But these were the folks who are some of the most strongly supportive of me, right? So it really made me rethink how I approach those relationships, much more valuing the individual rather than their ideology or their viewpoint on things. And then the last piece to this is specific to the trail, not to life experience, not to my time in politics, but specific to the trail. You are thrown into these situations where you have to rely on other people. You have to be somebody who can be relied on. And I had no choice but to, if I was going to survive, but to be part of that community, right? So I can remember a time when I was trapped on the side of a mountain with a couple other folks, one of whom was an Air Force vet, one was a defund the police organizer. When you're in situations like this, just talking to each other and not hitting the block button, but having good faith debate and discussions, you emerge out of that, I think, better. And when I look back and I revisit some of my approaches to, say, arguments or putting forward a position, sometimes I went way overboard in politics and that I wanted not just to win the argument, but to see the other person lose. But I think being in more organic environments like on the trail, just talking to people, hashing out debates like this, it's so obvious now in hindsight that as a result of having a conversation, both people can walk away better for the interaction. Whereas I think modern politics, and partially how I tried to approach it before, was one where one person had to lose and one person had to win. So I'd say just like anybody else's life, there's a lot of things that have been going on in my head through my experience and stuff like that. Part of it's political, part of it isn't. But, I'm not asking for anybody's votes. I'm just a dude who's trying to do the best with what I've got and what I've learned so far and to try to make a positive difference in this world.
It's really interesting. As you were talking, it's something I hadn't really thought of ever before, but you go back 20 years and we'd go out for beers or for coffee and you talk to people and we had friends across all political spectrums and you just kind of talk and, sometimes you disagree and sometimes you'd agree, but there was a lot more give and take. And almost today's discourse is entirely on social media and it's a lot harder to have those nuanced discourses. And I just thought, just when you're around different people, you talk to all, I spent a lot of time in huts with the Alpine Club and everybody's there. And you have these really interesting discussions with people, a mining engineer and a not-for-profit exec. And you're like, oh, wow, we actually disagree. I agree to disagree with each of them in some points. But you don't get that nuance on the sound bites or where people are just going for likes on social media. Boy, if we could all just spend more time in tents and huts, we'd be better off maybe.
Yeah, and I think it makes you a better person for being exposed to all of this and being challenged, right? I think that modern politics and social media really encourages that loyalty to your tribe and that just echo chamber, but that's not where you're challenged. It's not where you're improved.
I want to go back to the trail, and most people can't walk 2,600 miles in a summer. But are there certain parts of that you'd say, okay, if you have 2 weeks, you got to get to this part of the PCT? Are there places that are as beautiful as what we have up here in Canada that people should plan a pilgrimage to one of these summers?
Oh man, I felt so fortunate, and landing in Palm Springs and starting at the border to Mexico, almost felt like a different planet. Like almost all of my experiences out in BC, Alberta, and it also made me really value what we have. Right, there's a lot of the trail compares to Alberta and BC, but there's not much of it that's actually that much better. I hate saying this. Like, I really wish that I really wish that I could say that. I would say that there's some really stunning portions. If you've only ever done like Alberta hiking, I'd recommend the Southern California portions. The both terminuses, I think, would be valuable, either the start or the finish of the trail. If you're going northbound or southbound, you would get the experience of meeting a lot of folks who are just starting the journey, spending some time talking to them, or you could be with them for the final 2 weeks of the journey as well. Those would be probably the highlights. But as far as that aside, there's incredible places around Lake Tahoe. The Cascades are fantastic. Washington is fantastic. The Sierra is fantastic. Death Valley is fantastic. Yeah, there's an incredible itinerary that you could do, but there's no real boring part of the trail except for a portion near Lassen, which has just been devastated by a recent fire. So, as long as you're not in something that burnt down last year, I'd say that your odds are pretty good of picking up on some world-class trail, regardless of where you go in the 2,600 miles. But I'd still say really hard to compete with what we're so blessed and been given here in Alberta and British Columbia especially.
And your trail name was Pathfinder. I'm always interested as to how people get that trail name. How did you become Pathfinder?
Yeah, so on the trail, you sort of leave aside your regular life, your home life, and for 100 days, 172 days in my case, you're just all in on the trail experience, and trail families form, trail names are given. Usually it's something funny or like characteristic. It's a nickname that you can't give to yourself, but other people sort of bestow upon you. And in my case, it was as a result of it. It's challenging for me to speak of this because there was a time that we were essentially stuck in the Sierra, and it was a couple different combinations of factors, but the biggest thing I'd emphasize here is just my own ego and arrogance going into it. We're in a situation where myself and a few others were stuck on the side of a mountain. The weather had rapidly changed, and we were sort of halfway up this mountain pass. We couldn't continue, and we couldn't backtrack. We sort of had to shelter in place, burn snow for water. And it was an incredibly humiliating and humbling experience because I had really overestimated our capabilities. I had urged everyone on into a situation and a setting that it put us in, frankly, it put us in danger. And it really challenged me on a personal level, because after that point, I really endeavored and promised myself that I'd never put myself or other people in a situation, in a setting like that. It was as a result of that failure and that setback that we were able to make changes to how we approach things, how we planned our days, that ensured that we were able to finish the rest of the Sierra section without any injuries or anything like that. But it was as a result largely of what I did about the experience, doubling down on safety, doubling down on having the proper maps, the route finding and all the rest, that after having lost the confidence and the respect of the people that I was with, gradually I regained that confidence and I regained that respect that the people that was one of my trail friends at the time sort of bestowed upon me the name, because he felt that I'd made good on what I said I'd do in terms of having a much more safety focused effort to our trip, going into it with much more humility. So, it's a name that is it feels a bit bittersweet to me, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but it's a reminder to me that of all threats that I think nature can throw at a man, I think the worst one is our own ego and our arrogance and our overconfidence. So to me, the name is not necessarily just a feel-good thing. It's also a reminder that safety is everyone's responsibility. And if you want to be in a position of leadership, you have to do absolutely everything necessary to ensure that the people who are following you are not being put into harm's way.
And what people, don't realize is there are regularly, people go missing on the PCT. It is, especially with the early season with the snowpack, and then with, it melting and the raging rivers and, freak storms. It's dangerous to be in the Alpine any time of the year, but especially early on in the season. So I can imagine how challenging that would be. Jeromy, it's been really cool to hear about your experience. And to just kind of hear about kind of your transformation. I maybe this is common in politicians. I haven't heard one who's done a big walk and then kind of reflected on it. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today and talking a bit about the PCT and how it impacted you.
Well, I'm just so grateful for the community of supporters who stepped up, and there's such a diversity on the trail. As far as the highs, the lows, the highs are higher, the lows are lower, and the incredible amount of people, both former opponents, former supporters of mine, in terms of my politics or days in politics, those people rallied. And there were many, many times on the trail that I didn't know if I was going to make it or I was going to finish. And it was thanks to those notes of encouragement, those supporters, that I was able to really get toward the end. And I think in our year, it was about 1 in 10 who started in Mexico were actually able to make it to Canada. And in my case, I so wish that I could take personal credits. I so wish I could say it was my preparation. I wish I could say that it was my stubbornness. I wish I could say that I was special, but that would be 99% bullshit. The absolute truth of it is that I would not have made it as far as I did without the people that I met along the way, the incredible community of trail angels, the volunteers who went out of their way to help, the many other fellow hikers, some of whom joined me for thousands of miles, some of them joined me just for a couple days. It was all these people who were the inputs. They were the people who were responsible for getting me toward the finish. Of course, I had to walk a long way, but it was the other people that I met who were able. It's so essential in my success. So I wish that I could take credit for it, but it's the people that you meet along the way. And again, what they say is true. If you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go with friends.
That's a great point for anyone who's done one of these trips. It's way better when you do with other people and you work with them. If people want to follow along or catch up with you now, where can they find you? Are you still active? Did your social media addiction or habit return once you came back to civilization?
Yeah, I had to be cognizant of it, but you can still find me on Twitter and Facebook every other Friday. I'm a political commentator, actually, with my friend and former colleague, Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi. So he and I weigh in on politics, but it lets me scratch the itch without actually myself being in the fray. And I'm also the new CEO of the Glenbow Ranch Park Foundation. So we run a nonprofit focused on the protecting and conserving the 3,300 acre provincial park that's between Calgary and Cochrane. And we have a really unique co-management relationship with Alberta Parks. So I'd encourage anybody to come by, visit us in the visitor center, and I'd be happy to give you a tour. But you can find more details about that at www.grpf.ca.
I'll put links to those in the show notes. And if you are in Alberta, I think the Glenbow Ranch is like one of those gems that nobody knows about. It's just spectacular. It's so special. And I didn't go there until, I think it was like during the pandemic, I discovered it, or maybe it's just before. It's just this beautiful little park that is just so special. With that, I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music at amazon.com/10adventures.